You're tuned to Novidad TV, a Cape Verdean production.
Welcome to Novidad TV. I'm your host, Stephanie Lopes, and this is Black History Month 2007. There's going to be a lot of events taking place, one of which is a lecture at Brown University given by Cornel West. Now, if you don't understand what he's saying, please go and get an interpreter to come and explain to you what he's saying, because you definitely don't want to miss out. Now, we're going to bring it to you. Enjoy.
Who I am. And like Socrates in that line 24A of Plato's Apology that says, Parasia is the cause of my unpopularity. What is Parasia? P-A-R-R-H-E-S-I-S. It's bold speech, plain speech, frank speech, fearless speech, in humility, just like Socrates. Just like Socrates. What does it really mean to meditate on and prepare for death? Seneca says, he or she who learns how to die unlearns slavery. And of course, the kind of paideia that Martin Luther King Jr. presents to each and every one of us, but especially the precious students here at Brown, where you have to learn how to die as a mode of being educated, to examine your tacit presuppositions, to interrogate your hidden assumptions, so that when you leave the room sometime you recognize your worldview rests on pudding. Completely discombobulated and disoriented. Why? Because you're shattering your parochialism, you're shattering your provincialism, you're shattering your dogmatism, you're shattering your fundamentalism. You're learning how to live by allowing certain assumptions to die. Anytime you give up an assumption and set it loose, it's a form of death. He's not a relic in a museum. He's not some icon sitting on some pedestal. He's a wave in an ocean. He comes out of a tradition of a people whose gift to America is in part a Socratic gift. America, we want to raise the question, who are you really? Are you willing to look at your underside and your dark side? Are you willing to actually examine the history of people of African descent whose very labor constitute a fundamental pillar of your wealth, whose constitutions say we the people, but it becomes a pro-slavery document because you don't invoke the institution of slavery in your constitution and end up fighting a civil war over an institution not even invoked in your constitution. That's a fascinating tension and friction between democratic ideals and practices. No, that's mendacity. That's hypocrisy. And don't you know chickens come home to roost? You're going to reap what you sow. Martin Luther King Jr. comes out of a tradition of the Harriet Tubmans and the Frederick Douglasses, the Ida B. Wells Barnett's, Marcus Garvey's, Fannie Lou Hamer's and Ella Baker's, but not just black. There were some courageous white brothers and sisters, not a majority on the white side of town. Never forget about Lily Maria Child, appeal to that class of Americans called Africans of 1833, building on David Walker's great appeal of 1829. Never forget about John Brown. Never forget about Miles Horton. Never forget about Ann Braden. Never forget about Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. Those brothers and sisters of European descent who came to the New World and said, I'm willing to be Socratic too. And there's a dogma that sits at the center of this precious yet precarious experiment in democracy called the USA, a dogma of white supremacy. And if that particular dogma doesn't die, American democracy will not survive. Martin Luther King Jr. was one voice in this wave of an ocean that says, I am willing not simply to live and die for an ideal. I'm willing to learn how to die while I'm alive so I can live life more intensely and abundantly. Like Socrates, Martin Luther King Jr., as my dear brother Fine mentioned, and I say this especially to young people, he never confused success with greatness. He never confused financial prosperity with moral magnanimity. He never confused economic security with personal integrity. He never confused professional conscientiousness with deep moral commitment. What an example. And of course, we've got to be more concrete. We've got to move to the ground. Every time you talk about Martin Luther King Jr., you got to talk about his mama. No Martin without Alberta King. You got to talk about his father. No Martin without Martin Luther King Jr. Sr. All of us are our mama's child and our daddy's kid. Whether you like it or not. I happen to like it. I'm a love child. Martin Luther King Jr., rare among black leaders. He was a love child. And he could not take responsibility for it. They loved him in such a way that he fundamentally believed that he could find joy in serving others. They loved him so intensely that even when he fell on his face, they never gave up. That's not true for Malcolm. Much more an outsider. Father killed by the Klan. Mother went crazy owing to white supremacist abuse. He was loved by Elijah later. Yes, Martin Luther King Jr. from the very beginning was shaped and molded by a black civic society of family. The very church that he grew up in was founded by his mother's father, Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, church that he would later co-pastor. When he went to Morehouse, he found a giant named Benjamin Mays, who loved him and nurtured him. A leftist professor named Walter Shivers. Hard to find leftist professors in a university, let alone a black college. There was Walter. Read Marx, read Weber, read Durkheim, read C.L.R. James, and read W.B. Du Bois. It was George Kelsey, the first black professor to ever gain a position in a predominantly white institution, Drew University, Madison, New Jersey. He was the head of the religion department then at Morehouse. Shaped him, wrote a classic called Racism and the Christian Faith. When he went on to Crozier Seminary, there was George Davis, white brother, who embraced Martin, embraced him so intensely that Martin took 1/3 of all of his courses from that one professor. Isn't that interesting? What did he do? He gave Martin the classic of 1907. We're celebrating the 100th year of great Walter Rauschenbusch's Christianity and the Social Crisis. He turned to chapter 3 and talked about the social aims of Jesus. Jesus himself being a Socratic figure to the degree to which he was willing to call into question the practices not only of his own Jewish community but also of the Roman Empire. It ended up on a cross, that symbol of the night side of the Roman Empire where political criminals were killed as they attempted to keep in place the subjugated Jewish folk in that empire. He went on to BU. Met L. Harold Wolff. Took 6 courses from L. Harold Wolff. Wrote his dissertation on the concept of God. Paul Tillich and Henry Nelson Wyman. L. Harold Wolff, who was he? He was preoccupied with connecting Christian faith to the struggle for social justice. He gave him Abraham Joshua Heschel's text, The Prophets. He gave him Reinhold Niebuhr's classic of 1932, Immoral Man and Moral. In fact, there's a fascinating moment in that text. He says in 1932, it would be fascinating if a Negro leader were to emerge and deploy the practices of Gandhi and nonviolence to actually show the white population the degree to which they ought not only be morally guilty, but ought to be humiliated in their treatment of the people who were Jim Crow going around the world talking about freedom and liberty, but in fact, subjugating and exploiting black folk. You can see the young Martin just reading. And he meets a sister named Coretta Scott from Marion, Alabama, at the New England Conservatory. Not too many Negroes now at the New England Conservatory. You can imagine what it was like for Coretta coming out of Jim Crow, Alabama, going to Antioch College in Ohio and meeting young Martin. And she writes in her journal, the first time I ever met a black democratic socialist. Martin was already a member of the Intercollegiate Socialist Society and in love with an ex-Presbyterian minister who was in the Princeton class of 1907 named Norman Thomas, who ran for president perennially. lost perennially. But a major figure. In fact, when Martin first won the Nobel Prize, he said, "Don't give it to me before you give it to Norman." They said, "No, we reject your advice. Please come to Oslo." But let you know his connection to the people who shaped him. And this is very important. This is very important. Those who recall reading Plato's Euthyphro. What is piety? Piety is what? Acknowledging your indebtedness to those who came before, those who allowed you to make your journey from womb to tomb with grace and dignity. That's what piety is. Beginning with parents. For religious folk, it includes God, the friends, community, teachers in university, and so forth. And Martin took very seriously that kind of piety, and that's precisely why he was so humble, even though he was so courageous. But this first gift that I want to stress, and I can't overstress it, is mustering the courage to think for yourself. It is so difficult nowadays to engage in critical reflection. One of the things I fear, I don't fear it so much, students here at Brown, but I know you must have some, where the students are told to become so well-adjusted to the status quo, well-adjusted to injustice, not to think critically and become maladjusted to, against the grain. How you doing, my dear brother? Good to see you. To cut against the grain, to radically call into question complacency, call into question conformity, and most importantly, cowardliness. If there's one problem we have today in the ice age that is beginning to melt, and by ice age what I mean is an age where it becomes fashionable to be indifferent to the suffering of the most vulnerable. You remember what William James said about indifference? Indifference is the one trait that makes the very angels weep. Be callous to catastrophe, and I'm not just talking about Katrina. It could be the Ninth Ward in New Orleans before Katrina. It could be the poverty in Providence. It could be what's going on in Darfur. It could be the poverty in Guatemala. If you have the courage to think critically about yourself, it means, in fact, that you're also trying to become sensitive to the complexity of the world, but not lose sight of the humanity of those who are not able to flower and flourish and reach their potential. And Martin Luther King Jr. did not believe that's empty rhetoric. For him, it was a way of life. It was a mode of existence. He was willing to stake his whole being and pay the ultimate price of his life. And again, we're not putting him on the pedestal now. He's a human being. He's flawed like anybody else. He had patriarchal challenges vis-a-vis the sisters of all colors, but disproportionately black, because he spent most of his time with the black sisters. He had homophobic challenges. He didn't really accent the humanity of gay brothers and lesbian sisters. I think he would have if he had grown. And he was just beginning to become the kind of anti-imperialist, concerned about the world. Those Frantz Fanon called the wretched of the earth. So it wasn't just Vietnam. It wasn't just Africa, but an attempt to understand empire itself has to be a central category if you're trying to think critically about who you are, the way we're shaped by an American arrogance, thinking that somehow an American baby has more value than a baby in Venezuela, than a baby in South Africa, than a baby in Tel Aviv or on the West Bank, or a baby in China. Where does that kind of hubris come from? Are you willing to be honest about it and keep track of the humanity of each and every one of us? Martin himself a Christian minister, saying what? Imago Dei, each made in the image of God and having a certain kind of sanctity and dignity that ought to convince us to treat them in certain kinds of ways. certain kinds of ways that does not lose sight of their ability to flower and flourish. And it's quite fascinating that America is now just locked in to having to say something about Brother Martin every January and February. And it's got to be uncomfortable for a lot of folks. You know what I mean? It's like going to some of these prosperity gospel. And you figure, can you get to just love every once in a while? Go in some of these churches to see 2 ATMs before you see a cross. Can you get to Leviticus 19:18, love thy neighbor as thyself? You say you're fundamentalist, be fundamentalist about that line. Martin Luther King Jr. fell in love with a first century Palestinian Jew named Jesus. You can't talk about Martin Luther King Jr. trying to sustain himself as teenager and young adult when his house was bombed in January 1956 and almost killed his parents and his kids. And if he had been there, it would have been just another dead Negro trying to be free. He sat there in his kitchen. He said, Lord, you promised to be with me always. I had some doubts about you in seminary after reading Nietzsche. But I'm being tested now. Am I being responsible in terms of putting my precious babies right on the front line? And my loving and supportive wife on the front line. Will you be with me? I have fallen in love with you. Others might think it's an illusion. Others might think it's a delusion. But I'm banking on what you are able to do for me because I come out of a people who have tried to interweave their sense of who they are with the narratives of the Hebrew Scripture and the example of that first century Palestinian Jew named Jesus. And if it were not for that interweaving, we wouldn't have had the ring child and the spirituals when those particular peoples wrestling with a form of death in America called social death, of slavery for 244 years and American slavery for almost 80 years. Came together and said, we have no political power, we have no economic power, we have no social power, we can't even worship God without white supervision, we can't even learn how to read and write, so don't look for Black Proust and Tolstoy at the moment. We can't read. What can we do? We have a power of our voices and our bodies, and watch these voices come together in such a way, in such harmony and melody, that we'll sing songs that the world will have to take notice of hundreds and hundreds of years later, called the spiritual, the first art created by Americans, beneath American democracy, in American slavery, to those people who had no public worth whatsoever, no social standing whatsoever, no legal status whatsoever, just property to be bought and sold, resisted, given their love affair with that first century Palestinian Jew named Jesus. And of course, all black folk have never been Christian. All you got to do is listen to some blues songs for that. And there's always been Islamic brothers and sisters in the black community. There's always been Jewish brothers and sisters in the black community. There's always been some Buddhists and Hindus. And some self-styled forms of religion in the black community. But the dominant orientation has been the centrality of that black church in the Sittlichkeit, in the ethical life of black people. And Martin Luther King Jr. was a child of the black church. Now, to be a child of the black church is to do what? It's actually in some ways to out-Socratize Socrates. Brother West, what you talking about? Well, Socrates, as students know, I'm sure young adults as well, he never wrote a word. I do not recommend that to the students here. If you want to be inspired by Socrates' intellectual integrity and courage, but you've got to write your papers. Socrates, in the depictions, Plato, the profound dialogue, and the portraits, the more didactic stories of Xenophon. And in that grand satirical depiction, Socrates and Aristophanes' The Clouds, written when he was 23 years old. Never presents Socrates shedding a tear. He never cried. Martin Luther King Jr., the child of the black church, knew that his tradition was rooted in deep tears, very much like the Israelites of Hebrew scripture. Cries of affliction, tears of sorrow. So when they read Jesus wept, Amos had tears in his eyes when he said, let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. Those tears, the raw stuff of looking for an alternative. It could be an imperial Egypt. It could be a white supremacist America. Deep tears. Guttural cries and wrenching moans and visceral groans and silent lament. Yeah, that's the raw stuff. But that's only the beginning. It was King's attempt, based on the best struggle for black freedom in America, that would try to weave together the best of the legacy of Athens, the spirituality of genuine questioning at Socrates, with the spirituality of genuine compassion, of hesed in the Hebrew scripture, steadfast love of Jerusalem. What does it mean to bring together the best of Athens and Jerusalem? All you have to do is just listen to John Coltrane's Love Supreme. Get a sense of what I'm talking about. Listen to Marvin Gaye's What's Going On in the spring of 1971. Get a sense of what I'm talking about. Read the great Toni Morrison, Beloved. Read the essays of James Baldwin, and you'll see how Socratic questioning and genuine passion and love are weaved together in such a way that people are willing to confront the darkness the way David confronted Goliath and not become bitter. I think of Martin Luther King Jr., I think of Sly Stone's song called Stand. I know you are too young to remember Sly Stone, but I love that Negro. Love him. He said, stand! Stand with grace and dignity in the darkness. Take action with courage and compassion, with malice toward none. Don't allow your bitterness to degenerate into revenge. Don't let hatred to devour your soul, but preserve a righteous indignation against injustice and unfairness in order to do what? To promote those Sly Stone called everyday people, those the late great James Cleveland called ordinary people, to take back power in the face of elite use and abuse of power. And that's precisely what democracy is. It's ordinary people taking back power in the face of elite use and abuse of power. And is it no accident that the grandest democratic ideals in America were articulated by those ordinary people beneath America, sometimes symbolically, other times literally through political mobilization and organization, trying to take back power in the face of elite abuse of power. And in fact, in our day, 9/11, Martin Luther King Jr. and his legacy has so much to teach us. I was there in New York, and the planes hit. And I said to myself, tears flowing down my eyes, more innocent brothers and sisters dead in the second plane hit. I was there supporting the campaign of Freddie Ferraro, who was running for mayor. It was election that day. Then I said to myself, probably for the first time in all of American history, every American is going to feel unsafe, unprotected, subject to random violence, and hated for who they are. I said, dang, to be a nigger in America. Being unsafe, unprotected, subject to random violence, and hated for who you are. What happens when America undergoes its own distinctive form of niggerization? And a part of Emmett Till's mother, Mamie Till. What a grand moment in the history of this nation. Her precious baby, Emmett Lewis Till, named after his father who had died 1944, in a Jim Crow army trying to make the world safe for democracy against gangsters like Hitler. Her only baby, still in her 20s, 14 years old, killed by American terrorists, cowardly white supremacists. Dropped his body in the Tallahatchie River. You all know the story. Cotton gin iron around his neck, with a hole in his head where you could look on one side and see daylight on the other. She went down into Jim Crow, Mississippi, and brought his body back. A Rayner, the funeral parlor man, said, I received calls from the federal government, the state government, the local government. They don't want you to keep the casket open. She said, no, this is my only baby. We're going to keep this casket open. We're going to Robert Temple Church of God in Christ, and I want the world to see. And you know, 50,000 fellow citizens walked through that holiness church. The first massive civil rights demonstration 3 months before a sister named Rosa Parks sat down in order to stand up for justice. And what did she say when she stepped to the lectern? The tradition behind her, the weaving of the Socratic and the prophetic informing what she had to say. She looks over the lectern and sees her baby. His head is 5 times the size of his ordinary head. It was in Jet magazine. The late John Johnson had the courage to put it in. He received a call from the government and said, don't make it public. She said, no, I want the world to see the underside of American democracy. Mamie Till stepped up and said, I don't have a minute to hate. I'm going to pursue justice for the rest of my life. Level of spiritual maturity. Moral wisdom. What kind of strength and resiliency goes into that kind of statement? And she did it precisely until the end of her life, and she died January 6, 2003. And Brother Martin Luther King Jr. had the same challenge when he had to give the eulogy for 4 precious young sisters in Birmingham in September of 1963, just a few weeks after he told America about a dream that he had, about a bad check, about now is the time. First time he cried in public. What do I say to these young sisters? There was another sister living around the corner named Angela Davis who almost got blown up too, and she wasn't even going to church. Martin, what you gonna say, brother? Speak on behalf of the best of what it means to be human, what your mother taught you, what Morehouse put in you, what your white professors at their best tried to shape you in. What do they say? Somehow in the face of this kind of terror, I've got to muster the weapons of love and justice. What happens when America's terrorized and niggerized? Do we hear those kinds of voices, or do we hear, hunt them down like cockroaches? Nobody deals with our machismo identity. We're the policemen of the world. We will kill you if you mess with us. And I said to myself, if the dominant black response to American terrorism was the dominant response when America's terrorized, there would have been a civil war every generation. There wouldn't be an American democracy. There'd be no way we can live together, work together, engage in dialogue together. Sometimes I say to myself, white brothers and sisters, see Negroes walking, just give them a standing ovation. For Martin Luther King Jr. We thank you for Duke Ellington. We thank you for W.E.B. Du Bois. We thank you for John Hope Franklin. We thank you for... And that's just some alpha brothers. Ain't got to the Catholics yet. Ain't got the AKA sisters like Toni Morris. Ain't got the Deltas like Dorothy Height. What is it about these people that they can dish out such high-quality folk to undergo the paideia, that cultivation of self and maturation of soul and formation of attention in such a way that in the face of unbelievable terror, when their precious babies are shot down like cockroaches, they say, we refuse to engage in counterterrorism. We refuse to create a black Al-Qaeda. That we believe so much in who we are. It's not about trying to make white brothers and sisters feel good. It's not about trying to assuage their fears and anxieties and their greed. We know that to be a nigger is to be part of a white creation rooted in white fear and white greed and white hatred. We don't want to go that line. Instead of fear, we want courage. Instead of hatred, we want compassion and love. Instead of greed, we want to learn how to give. And the highest form of giving is what? Learning how to forgive others. Forgive others. Almost reminds me of that fifth line. Sophocles' last play. Oedipus of Colonus, performed after his death. He died at 90. A long time. That fifth line says what? What is the lesson of suffering? It's acceptance without resignation. It's a wisdom to persevere so that you preserve your personal integrity, your subversive memory, so that when you go under and your children try to learn from you, you will have something worthwhile to pass on. You will be, in the language of John Coltrane, a force for real good. Even if you're the last one around. That's the kind of brother we're talking about. That's what Martin Luther King did. He decided, just like each and every one of us have to do, what kind of human being do you want to be? What kind of legacy do you want to live? What kind of quality of service to others do you want to render? It doesn't mean you won't have fun, but you won't confuse joy with pleasure. And in our society, oh my God, you've got to be so radically Socratic and prophetic to go against the grain, because the rewards of the mainstream are precisely conformity, complacency, indifference to the suffering of others, especially the least of these. That's how you get ahead. No accident we have such mediocre leadership across colors. Mediocre leadership, all testing the polls to see what they really think. What do you think about the war? Well, it depends on what the polls say. You mean Barbara Lee is the only one sister to stand up against the war? And you mean to tell me she's under death threat for 2 weeks? Sister comes out of Allen Temple in Oakland. My dear sister, love East Bay. Y'all know I'm from Sacramento. Oh, we got California folks. Right on. You know what I'm talking about? Barbara Lee's same tradition. Can't talk about Martin, but I'm talking about the whole tradition. Yeah, Khalid Kweli, he was in on it too. He's part of the same tradition. All ages, all colors. Eddie Vedder, Pearl Jam, part of the same tradition. Willingness to speak out, but at that time, now everybody wants to jump on the bandwagon. Well, I really think that the evidence was such that didn't allow us to infer we should have invaded. My God, my God. The neocons were full of delusion. Oh, really? After hundreds and hundreds of thousands of precious innocent Iraqis killed, precious American soldiers gone, all colors, all sexual orientation, all genders. It is not a question of demonizing Bush. What I loved about Martin is Martin refused to ever get in the gutter. Well, so many people tried to put him. He would never return bigotry with his own bigotry. He didn't want to promote the cycle of hatred and bigotry. And he didn't do it in a self-righteous way. He said, this is what I have to say. Tell me what you think. I want to hear your arguments. Let's listen to the folk who want to invade Iraq. Well, we're concerned about the women being subjugated. Oh, really? Why don't you start with your friends in Saudi Arabia, where the women can't even walk on the same side of the street? Women can't even drive cars. Last time I saw down in Texas, you were holding hands with the head of Saudi Arabia. You know, if Saudi Arabia had artichokes rather than oil, it would be a very different relation. Different relation. I thought you were concerned about gangsters running things. Well, for me, China's got some gangsters running things. If I gave this speech in China, I'm going to jail. And you won't see me no more. I just kind of wave at you. But no, we got our corporations just salivating at those markets. Can't wait to get those profits. Unconcerned about the rights and liberties of our Chinese brothers and sisters, whose rights and liberties are just as valuable as the rights and liberties of anybody else in the world. Saddam Hussein, yes, Saddam Hussein's been against you for a long time. He was just promoted by the CIA in 1969. In fact, when I was a president of the graduate school, we marched against Saddam Hussein in 1982. Called him a gangster. But he was on America's side, then. He was America's gangster. We had another march when fellow Princetonian Donald Rumsfeld. You go to these universities, get some strange family bedfellows, don't you? Rumsfeld went to Saddam Hussein gave him golden spurs on behalf of the Reagan administration. Signed a friendship. America's gangster. But when he turns on me, all of a sudden he becomes the embodiment of evil. No, there's a pattern to his gangsterization. Look what he did to the Precious Curtis people, and you didn't say a mumbling word. Let's be honest. Let's be morally consistent. Let's bring together the Socratic questioning that has to do with the unarmed truth and that legacy of Jerusalem that has to do with unconditional love. And that humbles each and every one of us, because in the end we all fail to some degree, but we at least attempt to bounce back. I don't know exactly what Brother Martin would say about present day America. I never bring tears to his eyes. In the first place he would go was where the children reside. He said, how can it be that 21% of America's children live in the poverty and richest nation in the world? It's a moral disgrace. Just born in the world, locked into poverty. 9% in Canada. Canada is not known for being on the cutting edge of social justice. I shouldn't say that, but I come out of a country with an anti-imperialist tradition. You know, Canada's got challenges when it comes to anti-imperialist traditions. Hung with the Brits for a long time, didn't it? Deferring to the Queen. But oh, they make America look backward. Oh, we're concerned about economic growth. We've got a more dynamic economy. Yes, growth is crucial. Yes, it's a necessary, not sufficient condition for the greatness of a nation. A nation can never be great with 21% of its children living in poverty of all colors. Never be great. You can be wealthy. You can be powerful. The world will say, oh my God, you mean I've come back and America's grown so powerful and so wealthy. When will America grow up? Become mature? 40% of young black brothers and sisters, 42% of brown brothers and sisters living in poverty. Let us never forget our red indigenous peoples and their precious babies too, on those reservations, those whose very land and bodies constitute the ground upon which American democracy was built. Oh, Brother West, why are you bringing all that up? That's just PC chit-chat. No, that's human beings who had to pay a price, and Martin Luther King Jr. would never trivialize their suffering, but trying to hide and conceal it by invoking PC. He said, no, we need to pierce that kind of cheap way of dismissing other people's suffering. He said, yes, I might be the last one to do it. But I didn't go to the prison industrial complex. My God, how can there be a fourfold exponential growth in the prisons? And yet you look at the dilapidated schools in these chocolate cities and the unavailable health and child care, not enough jobs with a living wage, families weak, communities feeble, underground industries flowering and flourishing with drugs, bullets flying all the time, precious bodies disproportionately black and brown. Another funeral, another funeral. Who takes notice? Where's the moral outrage even among black leaders? To get so close to the establishment in Washington. Said that to my dear brother Obama. I said, Brother Obama, running for president is not the same as being on a book tour. Y'all know. If you're about to have your Christopher Columbus experience. You're going to discover America, brother. Oh, yeah, you're going to discover America. You better have your armor inflated. Not about some audacity or hope reduced to American dream. Black hope is not the same as the American dream. Just like let freedom ring is not the same as the bling bling. Freedom is about what? Self-respect, self-regard. You could be broke as the Ten Commandments and still have a self-respect. Or you could be wealthy as Bill Gates. God bless his philanthropy. Don't confuse charity with justice. I say the same thing to you, old brother. It's a beautiful thing to spend your $40 million for the black folk in South Africa. I give you an ovation. But don't confuse your philanthropy with justice. Justice is about the systematic arrangement of a society such that you reach the point where you might not even need charity if you get things right. So I applaud the philanthropy. There's a beautiful tradition in America that the wealthy elite do give some significant money. I applaud them when they support Brown University. I applaud them when they support Princeton and Harvard and Howard and so forth. That's fine, but we still have a ways to go. They say, oh, but Brother West, why are you downplaying? I'm not downplaying that at all. Just like I don't downplay at all the significant progress we've made against patriarchy and homophobia. And white supremacy, the Brother Malcolm says what? You don't stab a man in the back 9 inches, pull it out 6 inches, and celebrate your progress. No. Oh, no. Still got a lot of work to do. You can see Martin moving from the prison industrial complex, moving into the home, and seeing these cowardly brothers of all colors engaged in domestic violence against vulnerable women. What was this machismo identity resulting in such barbaric actions? You ought to be shame on yourself. And my God, Brother Martin turned the TV on and happened to hit BET or VH1. All these salacious bodies moving and grooving, and the brothers walking around with these chains and going to the gym and acting as if somehow they've got to be big and bad like urban outlaws rather than trying to be great in terms of quality of service. He would say what? First thing he would say, oh, those chains, they remind me of that magnificent phrase in Nathaniel West's great novella, Miss Lonelyheart. His real name was Nathan Weinstein. He said what? This jewelry is the paraphernalia of suffering. They're trying to get distance from their pain, but what a truncated way of trying to do it. You need to confront the source of your suffering. That gold chain around your back, that Rolex watch on your arm is not going to do it. And he would look even deeper, and he would say, in the language of the great late Donny Hathaway, in the present Roberta Flack, where is the love? These young folk haven't been loved enough. They haven't been cared for enough. They haven't been attended to enough. Too many of the fathers are drifting, some of them downright irresponsible. Too many of the mothers are overworked and underpaid and having their own crisis of intimacy in terms of trying to find a mate who will respect them in such a way that they can flower and flourish. These young kids just out here rootless, deracinated, trying to raise themselves, hungry and thirsty for some compassion, somebody to take them seriously, somebody to affirm the best of who they are, to accent the angel, the better angels of their nature, and they don't find it, are not enough. And they go searching for it. They get addicted. Alcohol, sex, narrow conceptions of success. That's what addiction is. An attempt to fill the void when some genuine affirmation is not in place. Not enough respect. Martin would cry. And that's what we ought to do. But not just cry, but muster the courage. Think for ourselves. To empathize, organize, mobilize, in the language of the Negro National Anthem, to lift every voice, our voice, like the jazz musicians. Have enough courage to find your voice. And when you lift it, be so critical. be loving, cut against the grain. And in the end, have the courage to hope, but never be optimistic. There is a blues element in Martin Luther King Jr.'s life and legacy. And what is the blues but a sweet and sad indictment of misery? It tries to allow the artist to share a soothing sweetness against the backdrop of psychic death, self-hatred. Black folks know they have the wrong hips and lips and noses and hair texture, and a spiritual death. Reaching the point where all I can do is sell out, give up, cave in, jump on the mainstream bandwagon, and forget the best of those who came before. What a challenge it is. It ought to unnerve, it ought to unsettle, and it ought to unhouse each and every one of us. But at the same time, it also ought to convince us to dig deep into the sources of our own self-formation, of our own American society, the Whitmans, the Melvilles, the Sondheims, the Langston Hughes, the Billie Holidays, the James Browns who just left us, Gerald Leverts who just left us, the Alice Coltrane who just left us. What a rich legacy, but especially that legacy of Brother Martin Luther King Jr. Thank you all so very much.